Hello, everyone. Thank you for your kind invitation to speak today. I am sorry that I cannot do so in person, but I'm honored to be here because I know we all share the same convictions. First, that the small farms of Asia, 70% of the world's 570 million total, are vital to the future food supply of the region. And second, that we can and we must do much more to invest in them. We all know how tough the last few years have been for small-scale farmers. They have been hit hard by COVID-19, price instability, and the impact of climate change and biodiversity loss. Small-scale family farmers throughout all Asia have been hit particularly hard. With average farm sizes that are under 2 hectares across much of the Asia and the Pacific, these smallholder food producers are highly vulnerable to external forces, and they really need our investments. Because family farming is the backbone of rural economies and of food systems everywhere. In fact, 1/4 of us on the planet rely on small family farms for our livelihoods and our food security. Without family farms, many of us would not have eaten today. Not only are small farms efficient, they also have a lighter relative footprint on essential ecosystems. They do not depend heavily on fresh water for crops, and they preserve biodiversity instead of depleting it. But today, higher temperatures and more erratic and extreme weather threaten their livelihoods and the region's overall food security. To adapt, small family farms desperately need investments to overcome the growing risks that they are facing. Yet, they just get 0.8% of climate finance to help them adapt to extreme changes in our climate. This needs to increase because it is an investment in our collective future. Let's be clear, small farms are businesses. They need access to finance and tools to use it. They need to be fairly and decently compensated for both the food and the raw materials that they produce, and for the environmental, biodiversity, and watershed management services that they provide. And this is where the close collaboration between IFAD and the Asian Development Bank comes in. I am proud that we have been partners since IFAD's inception in 1977. Working together alongside Farmers Association and local and national governments, we have made a tangible difference to both the lives of millions of farmers and to sustainability in the region. Across Asia and the Pacific, our 570 million current portfolio, spanning from Pakistan to Nepal and from China to Tonga, aims to raise incomes, while also enhancing sustainability and preserving biodiversity. Our joint project in hilly areas of Nepal helped 67,000 farming households to raise their income and to reduce their use of chemicals. Drawing on local knowledge and traditional techniques for pest management, it introduced agroecological practices such as mixed cropping, biomulching, and swales, an ancient innovation that helps gather water without irrigation systems. In the Philippines, we work with indigenous communities to develop sustainable agroforestry, coffee and fruit cultivation, reducing runoff and enhancing resilience against typhoon and drought. Or in Bangladesh, where we tap the Internet of Things to install remote water quality sensors that help fish farmers monitor water quality and oxygen levels when rainfall is scarce. The result is an ecological renaissance for the River Halda and an economic renaissance for the fishing communities. Ladies and gentlemen, IFAD prides itself as a partner in transforming food systems, including in this time of changing climate and biodiversity. Over the decades, IFAD has been a pioneer in every aspect of agriculture and climate risk management, from index insurance to blended finance. In all our projects, rural people are important partners, contributing their ideas and experience at every stage from project design to implementation. Often they also invest alongside us. We make always sure that these projects benefit the most vulnerable, including youth, women, and indigenous peoples. And we are good at what we do. In 2021, IFAD was ranked the most efficient and effective multilateral organization by the Center for Global Development. By leveraging our balance sheet and our partnerships, we convert every dollar contributed by our member state into $6 invested on the ground. In our upcoming investment cycle, 2025 to 2027, we are prioritizing nature-based solutions to restore and protect ecosystems, drawing upon the wisdom of scientists, farmers, and indigenous peoples. Over the next 3 years, we aim to enhance the lives and resilience of 100 million rural people. Across Asia and the Pacific, the Asian Development Bank will be a vital partner in achieving all of these goals. At this time of dramatic and deadly climate change, I look forward to deepening our work with the Asian Development Bank. Together, we can improve the lives and incomes of small-scale farmers and of the communities and societies in which they live. We can ensure that they have the tools they need to build resilient livelihoods, to feed their families and communities, and to continue to play their crucial role in preserving biodiversity and a food-secure future for everyone. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you very much for that great introduction. And I do want to acknowledge the support from ADB for this work that we've done to try to look at key aspects. Let's see, is the thing working? Can you bring up my PowerPoint? Oh, there, okay. So we're trying to look at several aspects of long-term food security in Asia and with support from ADB. And let me just start by talking about some of the goals of Asian agriculture policy, which we all know is ending hunger, achieving food and nutrition security, while at the same time promoting sustainable, resource-conserving agriculture. But achieving these goals, of course, requires meeting key food system challenges. And these include, as you can see here, the issue of climate change, which has already been raised several times here, which reduces productivity and well-being in agriculture. And of course, agriculture is also a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So for sustainable intensification, we do need to reduce agriculture's footprint. Water scarcity is increasing with growing demand from many sectors and the rising cost of developing new water resources, which leads to constraints on supply. Agriculture productivity growth is slowing in many countries, while agriculture research and development expenditures are tending to decline in most of Asia. So agriculture input subsidies distort production decisions and crowd out productive investments in public goods. At the same time, as we've heard, value chains are often inefficient with high marketing margins and high volumes of food lost and waste. So in this presentation, we're going to discuss prospects for meeting these challenges under alternative investment scenarios for Asian agriculture. And we won't have time to really discuss in detail, but the framework we're using is the impact modeling system that IFPRI has, which is a set of linked climate, water, food, and economic models of the world agriculture economy, which generates estimates of production, consumption, food prices, and some environmental impacts for a quite detailed, highly disaggregated set of countries and regions, as you can see here, including 158 countries and 154 river basins. So we're taking a scenarios approach to this work, starting from a reference scenario, which takes the population and income trends from IPCC's SSP2, which is the middle of the road, demographics and economic growth. And this is the most recent version that was just released about 3 months ago. We also include business as usual projections of agricultural investment and productivity growth, and we're looking in this particular presentation using the climate scenario RCP 7.0 which is a moderate to somewhat severe pathway for climate change, and using the IPCSL climate model. We also have done sensitivity analysis across different models and RCPs. We're using a number of alternative investment scenarios, including investment in agriculture R&D, irrigation and water, rural infrastructure, and repurposing of subsidies. So just briefly, here's a summary of the investment scenarios. So you can see in investment in agriculture productivity growth, we have 3 levels of investment that you can read there yourselves. In irrigation and water use efficiency, we have one scenario that just expands irrigated area, and then another where, in addition to that expansion, we have increased investments in water use efficiency through modernization, rehabilitation, and upgrading of systems. Investment in rural infrastructure includes rural roads, rail, electrification, as well as markets and cell phones to improve marketing efficiency and reduce post-harvest losses. Then we do a more comprehensive investment, which combines the scenarios that you see there. Finally, we look at the issue of repurposing subsidies, which you've already heard about. And we designed this scenario as redirecting 30% of subsidy payments to producers to the investment categories described above for the 8 countries in which there was enough complete data, and you can see those here. So briefly, let's talk about the annual investment costs, 2020 to 2050, under different scenarios. You can see here business as usual on the left-hand side, or the reference scenario, and the investment scenarios increment on the right-hand graph. Let me apologize for the graphs are on different scales, so they're not directly comparable. But you can see here on the right-hand side, the increases are shown for the different categories, and also the percentage increases for each category relative to the reference scenario. The total investments are summarized below for the reference scenario and the comprehensive scenario. And you can see for Asian Pacific, for example, the annual investments in the reference scenario about $40 billion a year, and under the comprehensive investment, $68 billion a year, or a 69% increase. So let's start with some of the results that we derive from this. Starting here, is we can see that the increased investments boost food consumption relative to the reference scenario. And this shows changes in kilocalorie availability in 2050 compared to 2020 in the reference scenario and the comprehensive scenario. Let's look at Asia and the Pacific. So you do get, of course, improvements in the reference scenario across different food groups other than cereals, which actually has a negative increase. So you've seen already the possibilities of diversification. But then, of course, the comprehensive scenario boosts that consumption substantially, with the total increasing, as you can see, by about 30% compared to that reference scenario. And we do see diversification, as you can see here, looking at the different food groups, and cereals in particular, the share declines between 2020 and 2050, while fruits and vegetables, oils and sugars, and animal products increase somewhat. In a sense, this slide actually understates the amount of diversification. If you looked at the share and the increase between 2020 and 2050 rather than the endpoint, you'd see a greater change in the dietary patterns. The investments also, of course, increase projected crop yields, and you see here projected crop yields for the different regions, and for Asia and the Pacific, for the reference scenario, and the high R&D scenario, and the comprehensive scenario. So, for example, for Asian Pacific in 2050, there's an increase from 8.5 tons per hectare to over 10 tons per hectare. And you see comparable increases in the different scenarios. So you do get substantial yield increases. And these, together with changing patterns in consumption, have a substantial influence on food prices as well. So again, we're looking at the alternative scenarios. You can see in the reference scenario, prices increase over time for all the commodities here. Some relatively slowly, like animal products, others quite high, cereals, fruits and vegetables, and roots and tubers. But in all cases, you get substantial reductions in prices over time due to the increased investments. These changes that I've just talked to you about have then very significant impacts on the risk of hunger in Asia. And here we start with, we're going to have 3 slides here. The first is Asian Pacific, the shares and population hungry in Asian Pacific. And here, for the region as a whole, you can see even under the reference scenario, you get very rapid improvements. And even by 2030, you're actually coming close to meeting the SDG 2 goal of under 5% hunger by 2030. But you also see that investments greatly accelerate the reductions and cut hunger substantially relative to the reference scenario. And the other point to make here is that, in a sense, these scenarios are too optimistic because a huge amount of this change is due to success in China and also to Southeast Asia, whereas other regions aren't necessarily faring as well. Here, for example, we see South Asia, which begins in 2020 with about 15% of hungry of the total population. And looking at the blue line, you see in 2030 it's still at 8% and reaches about 5% just after 2035, where you get much faster improvement and actually meet the SDG goals with the higher investment. But South Asia in general has quite a bit of success, in part due to the very rapid growth in income. Central and West Asia is another example, goes from about 14% and has a much slower trajectory of reducing hunger. It doesn't even reach the hunger target in 2050 under the reference scenario. Well, it does manage to meet it by about 2040, just past 2040 under the high investment scenario. We also look at projected nutrient availability for selected countries here. This one is for iron. We also look at zinc and vitamin A in the analysis. And you can see there that we get increased availability of these important nutrients under the reference, under the investment scenarios. But in fact, it's somewhat slow, to be honest. So a lot more has to be done here. India, you can see, improves relative to the reference scenario, but still under the recommended intakes for iron. Kazakhstan and the Philippines, as other examples, are above the recommended intakes and do improve. So we're getting some improvement in nutrient availability under these references also. But of course, as we've heard also, distributional concerns are of utmost importance, with many not being able to access even this level of nutrients. Projected water use here under different scenarios. Blue water is the water in surface reservoirs and aquifers delivered by irrigation. And we look at these, you can look across the various regions, and just to summarize briefly for Asia and Pacific, when you only invest in expanded irrigation, that year EXP scenario, by 2050 you actually increased water use by 2%, but when you have the same trajectory of investment in irrigation together with investment in water use efficiency, you can actually reduce water use by about 7.5% while maintaining the growth in irrigated areas. So again, these scenarios can be highly effective there. Next, we have investment in agricultural R&D, reducing agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. So here we have emissions in million tons of CO2 equivalent, again by region. And we see here for all regions, and then Asia and Pacific on the right-hand side, even in the reference scenario, there is some improvement over time in reducing greenhouse gas emissions due to a reduction over time of the emissions intensity of agriculture per dollar value in agriculture. But again, we see how these improvements can be accelerated under the higher investment analysis, shown this one for agriculture productivity growth, which shows by 2050 we have reduced the initial emissions in Asia and Pacific by 1/3 here, and that's because of land-saving productivity growth, together with generation and adoption of technologies such as conservation tillage, precision agriculture, and improved management of rice and livestock, among others. The final scenario that we'll look at really quickly is just a quick summary of the investments in the rural infrastructure investments. Under this scenario, this one, together with the repurposing of subsidies, I think can be seen as possible best by investments from the analysis. As you can see, the broad-based rural infrastructure investment cuts post-harvest losses by about 50% in the region, while also reducing marketing margin, increasing production by 1 to 5%, but more importantly, lowering food prices and reducing hunger by 16 million people in 2035 compared to the reference scenario. The repurposing of agriculture sector government subsidies in just these 8 countries that we show is also very powerful. And remember, that's only 30% of the subsidies. So for these, this repurposing benefits not just those countries, but the entire ADB region, increasing ag output by 17% and reducing hunger by 51 million people, or 30% in 2035. So that's illustrated the power of reallocating those subsidies into productive investments. Just a few conclusions then. As we saw here, increased investments in agricultural productivity, irrigation, and water use efficiency are highly effective, and there I list the ways there. But of course, what we saw is not good enough. So beyond these investments, you need investments in health, nutrition, clean water and sanitation, and education to further reduce hunger and child malnutrition and improve sustainability. In addition, there's always going to be some vulnerable people who aren't reached through these kinds of investments. So here you need income transfers and safety nets that can help them through short-term stresses or disasters and improve their nutrition and health over time. In addition, the impact of these investments would be further increased by improvements in the enabling environment for sustainable intensification, including extension innovation systems to enhance uptake of technology, gender-responsive policies and investments to increase women's access to land, finance, natural resources, and information, and design of greenhouse gas emissions reduction policies, including how to manage carbon payments in this system. Finally, is increasing access to farmer and sectoral finance to support private investment as well as public investment. But we can see here that a well-targeted portfolio of investments and policy reforms can meet the goals of Asian agriculture policy, even in the face of these significant food system challenges. Finally, I was asked to provide some key questions for discussion coming out of this work. And one that we didn't address directly is that there are tendencies showing that rural-urban migration, and as well as innovations in crop breeding systems, farming systems, and digital technologies are improving economies of scale in agriculture in Asia, which is leading to some pressure to consolidate land ownership or operational sizes of farms. So the question is, how can growth and the welfare of small farmers be balanced in such a transition? Next is, how can agriculture, health, and nutrition policies be integrated for maximum impact, getting out of the silos of these different policies? Another question then is, should investments be allocated specifically to different crops to further encourage diet diversification, moving investment, for example, from cereals to fruits and vegetables? And finally, how can policymakers address the big political economy challenge of repurposing agriculture subsidies? Thank you.